Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see all you guys. If you are new here, my name is John Wagler, and I'm part of the team here, and just so thrilled that you chose to be with us on another rainy day, as if we needed it, right? And so, and I will do my best to not make any jokes about tech or anything like that, as Jess said earlier. I know I expected Darrell, he went to ODU, and so I expected him to have like a jersey on or something this morning leading worship, but through the grace of God, he didn't. So just so grateful that you guys are here. Every week I talk about generosity right before the sermon, and this week is a fun one to talk. Well, it's always fun, but this week in particular is a fun one to talk about. We're a part of a church network called ARC, which is Association of Related Churches, and we were ARC church plant number 426, I believe. This Sunday, today, number 800 was being planted and started, and so here's just what's really cool. Is that when you give here, part of what we give to is to help start other churches through the network. And so just like you guys have found Hill City to be a home church for you, now we're helping start other churches throughout this country. And so it's pretty cool that the 800th one was started today. And so which has been really cool because like now there are other cities getting churches like Hill City and their communities and people coming to know Jesus. And so that's a beautiful thing. So when you give in the share boxes or you give online, just know that that money is going towards a lot of things to help people not only know Jesus, but to create some environments for people to do so. So thanks so much for being a part of that. We are in week number 3 of our Breakthrough series. And here's what Breakthrough is as we've defined it every week, is a sudden, dramatic, and important discovery or development. A sudden, dramatic, or important discovery or development. And what we established in week 1 was that we all need a breakthrough in some area of our life. Some of us might need a couple of breakthroughs, but we all have at least one area where we need a breakthrough in our life. In the first week, we established this question, and it's actually one that I'm going to talk about every single week of the series, and that's this: how is your plan going? How's your plan going? And the reason why I say that is because it's cool that we know we need a breakthrough, but if we don't come up with a plan and then do something about it, then guess what will happen? Next year we'll be back here in the fall on this kickoff series on breakthrough again, or how to handle stress, or how do I deal with my fears and insecurities. You're like, yep, that's me still. That's me. And so what we want to do is just have a plan in place and start working towards something so that this breakthrough can begin to happen, whatever that is in your life. And so this week in preparation for it, here's what I was craving. Tres Leches cake from Shindig's, the milkshake cupcake from Pearls, Lacey's cookies and brownies that she makes, my mom's strawberry shortcake, and her mudslide cake that she makes. And because we're talking about self-control. And in all of those things, I have none. And so the whole time as I'm prepping this, I'm like, this is me. And so this idea of self-control is actually one that we don't love to talk about, right? Like when you heard Josh say earlier, it's on self-control, there was a collective groan in here, which is awesome heading into a sermon. But when we talk about self-control, this isn't something that we're like, yes, I love talking about self-control. How can I have more of it? It's something that is tough for us to talk about and to take in, because when we start talking about self-control, it forces us to either A, recognize where we need it, and then B, do something about it. It puts something on us immediately. And even when we start talking about self-control, and I think this is really important to kind of just set the tone for, when you look at Galatians chapter 5, and it talks about the fruit of the Spirit, what comes out of us when we're kind of in tune with God, in tune with the Spirit of God. And what it says that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and yes. So what does that mean? Well, that means that when we're operating like we should, connected to the Spirit of God like we should be, then what ends up happening and coming out of us is self-control. And then when we lack self-control, that means that we are out of step with what God wants for our lives, okay? And so we're going to take a look at that in some different ways today, and in particular in one story in the Old Testament with this guy named Samson. But, self-control is such a big deal, and it's something that we all have to figure out how to have in a deeper and more meaningful way. As a parent, outside of a faith in Jesus, teaching our kids self-control is the number one thing we can do. Okay, and so you might be thinking like, yes, I don't have kids, loophole. And so let me shut that loophole for you. The greatest predictor of success in our lives is self-control. And here's what I mean by that. Here's what I mean by success. I'm talking emotionally, physically, spiritually, and financially, okay? That in those areas, emotionally, spiritually, financially, and physically, that if we have self-control in those areas, that what we'll begin to see is like we'll have a healthy lifestyle, a healthy mindset, a healthy view on everything. And we'll have a great perspective in our lives. But when we lack it, we miss out. When we lack it, we get unhealthy. Even when you kind of just look at what self-control does or doesn't do in our lives, it's formed as a child. And some of you guys might have felt this before, where maybe your parents didn't instill self-control in you at all. They kind of just let you do what you wanted to do and be like, oh, our kid's crazy, I don't know. But like there's like kind of has that element, and then you reap the consequences of that later on in life. That's just the way it works. And like when we lack it in the beginning, and the way things are shaped in our brains and what we value and what we think we can do and all that stuff. And so self-control becomes a big deal. And even from like the beginning of time for us, and then it kind of continues to move throughout our lives in different ways. And so even when we kind of think about self-control, if I was like, hey, what's one area you needed? And you guys would all say something back. And it would be in different forms. It might be in your health. It might be just in your faith. It might be in just kind of some physical nature of things, or maybe emotionally, or whatever it is. But you would say something back. Some of you others might say something like this: no, I control everything. And I would say, you need self-control in your control, because you're terrible to be around when you try and control everything, right? And I know that because I can get that way. So we can have those moments too. And so even when you look at self-control, what it does even inside our brains, it's just interesting kind of biologically. We ends up happening is some inflammation. A lack of self-control actually causes inflammation in our brains. Now, here's why that's important. When inflammation starts happening in our brains and in our bodies, like it brings about some other things too. Now, it's not the root cause or anything. Like self-control is not the root cause, and self-control is not the automatic cure to anything. But what self-control does do is it enhances some issues that you have. So think about it this way. Lacey actually said this in the back. She said, Lacey has an autoimmune disease. She has celiac. And so if she doesn't have self-control, then what ends up happening is the lack of self-control hurts her body more. Okay? And so self-control becomes a really big deal. Even so much so that the lack of self-control in any area of our lives, as it causes that inflammation, it actually increases symptoms of depression and anxiety. Okay? Now, is it the cure-all to everything? No, it's not. But what it does is the lack of it increases all the things we're already dealing with, okay? And so this idea of self-control becomes so important. I was looking at kind of like this one line that I wanted us to focus on today, and it's simply this, and this is the one thing I hope you take home with you today and kind of think through when it comes to self-control. But it's a really simple line. It says this: the lack of self-control is telling your future self and relationships that you don't care. A lack of self-control is telling your future self and relationships that you don't care. And that's critical. That's critical, because think about it this way. This idea, like everyone, even marketers even know that we lack self-control, right? What's the most marketed thing in our country? Do you guys know? Debt. Everywhere you turn, it's debt. Why? Because we lack self-control. Why is there a Me Too movement? Lack of self-control. See, at the heart of the lack of self-control is this strong desire for entitlement, for privilege, for power, for selfishness. That's at the heart of our lack of self-control. And so it's important for us to deal with it. And so I want to take a look at this story in the Bible with this guy named Samson. Samson is what I would refer to as a fake hero. And here's why. I think the way that if you grew up in church, the way we would talk to kids about Samson would be like, and Samson had this long flowing hair. He was so strong and he defeated the enemies of God. And we'd be like, yay, Samson. That's just not his story at all. It's actually just the opposite. I think he's a fake hero that we've kind of made up, okay? And here's what I mean by that. It's not that Samson's made up, it's just that the content of what we think about Samson, I think, has been. And so here's what was happening at that time for the Israelites. They were led by this guy named Moses in the beginning. And then Joshua came along after that. But Moses helped kind of lead them out of slavery and into what would be eventually the promised land. He didn't get them there, Joshua did. Well, Joshua helped lead them for a while, and then eventually what ended up happening was Israel was in this weird rhythm of things, okay? They would see God do something for them. They'd be like, yay, God, and then they would disobey, be sinful, and then they would like feel bad. And they had like suffer the consequences, and then they would repent of that, ask for forgiveness, and God would be like, come on, I got you on this. And then it was just this cycle over and over and over and over again. And guess why that kept happening? It was a lack of self-control. But here's what else started happening. Their consequences for their actions started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And my guess is, if we're all honest with ourselves, we know that to be true in us. Whenever we've turned away, whenever we've lacked self-control, like the first go around, it's like, all right, I'll be good, it'll get better. And you keep doing it, what happens? The consequences get larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. And it's not that God isn't there. It's not that God doesn't forgive. It's not that God doesn't come back around with us or anything like that. It's just the consequences get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and we continue to lose focus and perspective on what's happening around us. The same thing were happening with these Israelites. And so they got into this rhythm, so much so that then another generation came. So Joshua dies, and then I'm not going to read it this service, but in Joshua chapter 2, it just talks about how what ended up happening with the Israelites was the generation that remembered dies out, and because no one was kind of keeping it in front of them to kind of continue to learn and remember, they die out, or that generation dies, this new generation comes in, and it says that they just turned away from God, started worshiping all of the idols and all of the things of this world and the people. So here's what all that means. Because we don't like to think that we would ever do something like that, but here's all that they were doing. They were choosing things that were not of God as more important than the things of God. That's idolatry. Okay, so I know we don't like that language because we just like to be like, I'm just struggling, right? It's easier to say things like that, and that's fine to say things like that, but it's just easier on us. But truly what we're doing is anytime we place something over God or deem something more important than God, it's idolatry because you think it's more important than God. And so you start kind of shaping your life around that. And so that's what was happening with these Israelites. And so what would end up happening is God would provide these judges to just kind of help rule them in these moments, and they would be for certain lengths of time. And then this guy named Samson comes along. So I want to read out of Judges 13 to start off, so we kind of get a little bit of background on the story of Samson. And it says this in Judges 13. It says, again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, so the cycle is continuing. And the Lord handed them over to the Philistines, who oppressed them for 40 years. In those days, a man named Manoah from the tribe of Dan lived in the town of Zorah. His wife was unable to become pregnant, and they had no children. The angel of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife and said, even though you have been unable to have children, you will soon become pregnant and give birth to a son. So be careful. You must not drink wine or any other alcoholic drink, nor eat any forbidden food. You will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and his hair must never be cut. For he will be dedicated to God as a Nazirite from birth. He will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. And I want to highlight the last line of that verse, and it's just this one word. It says begin. Or it says he will begin to rescue Israel from the Philistines. And so here's what that immediately lets us know. that it actually didn't finish with him, meaning Samson. That there was something in his life that began something, but he wasn't the full reason. He didn't help with the rescue of that. And so what we then see is like, all right, this Nazirite vow. And so what does that mean? And so there was these things that you vowed not to do, and stuff was really around food and dead animals and some other things too, and what you wore and some stuff. But the purpose was, it was a personal decision to not do those things so you could focus on God and have a stronger purpose in your life, all right? So as parents, his parents did a great job at this in the beginning, just trying to get him to be like, all right, this is your life now. This is what you do. All right, and so they kind of cultivated that inside of them. But here's what started to happen. They forgot, seemingly, to cultivate a heart of self-control. And what we begin to see is something starts changing in Samson's life. And he desires, and this isn't a bad thing, but he desires a wife. He desires a wife. And so in chapter 14, we see this. He says, one day when Samson was in Timnah, one of the Philistines a woman caught his eye. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, a young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Get her for me. His father and mother objected. And this is good, what they're saying here. Isn't there even one woman in our tribe or among all the Israelites you could marry, they asked. Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find a wife? But Samson told his father, get her for me. She looks good to me. Now, what we see is a lack of self-control, don't we? But why did that happen originally? Well, I think part of it is because of the way that they were parenting, to be honest. I mean, should Samson be able to talk to his parents that way? You know, and it reminded me, in Target recently, I was watching this little kid scream for a toy, and he was just so disrespectful. He's probably 4 or 5 years old, so disrespectful to his mom. And then his little sister joined in, and they were just these 2 little kids screaming at their parents. And I watched the mom, and the dad was just being lazy, sitting off to the side. And I watched the mom just be like, oh, these kids, and just roll their eyes and be like, not now, sweetie. And in my head, I'm like, someone parent these freaking kids right now. And so it was just bothering me so bad to just see this. But here's what was happening. They're establishing this idea of a lack of self-control is okay. And Samson we see in his response to his parents, and we see in the desire of his heart that was cultivated. Even though there were some outliers, just some good things, right? I thought, the parents are doing a good job being like, hey, isn't there someone who believes the same things as you, who kind of wants the same things as you? Can't you find a wife? And he's like, no, I want what I want. Maybe you're like me and kind of know that feeling. I want what I want, and I'm going to get it. We kind of sound eerily like Samson there, don't we? And then the end result, because of that lack of self-control, is this destruction starts to happen in his life, and not just to him, but to the people around him. And so he gets this wife. So his parents cave, or his dad caves, and he gets this wife. And then he deems him not capable to keep the wife, but we'll get to that in a second. But he gets this wife, and then on the walk to go get this wife, he kills a lion on this walk. Because again, Samson had this massive strength, and a bunch of stories in here about his feats of strength. But he kills this lion and leaves the lion there dead on the road. Well, on their way back, after getting the wife, in verse 8, it says this. Later, when he returned to Timnah for the wedding, he turned off the path to look at the carcass of the lion. And he found that a swarm of bees had made some honey in the carcass. He scooped up some of the honey into his hands and ate it along the way. He also gave some to his father and mother, and they ate it. But he didn't tell them he had taken the honey from them, from the carcass of the lion. Let me explain to you what is then happening after this. So here Samson is scheming. Why is he scheming? Because he has no self-control. Why did he lie? Because he has no self-control. So what he does is he breaks this vow that it's supposed to be not to touch any dead animals. And not only does he touch a dead animal, he digs in there for the honey, takes the honey out, which he shouldn't have been eating, then brings that honey to his parents to bring them into his lack of self-control and his scheming and his lying. So now he's bringing other people into his life. And he's hurting them with his lack of self-control. And so from this point, here's what happens with Samson. He kind of gets a little angry at his dad, and then his dad says, you can't have this wife. I'm giving your wife to your best man. So which everyone would be so grateful for. But now the wife goes to his best man rather than to Samson. So Samson gets so mad, and he then ties the tails of 300 foxes together and lights them on fire, sends them out into the vineyards and destroy all the crops. And so all of the livelihood of the Philistines is gone. All right, so as you can imagine, the Philistines get incredibly angry and want to come at Samson again, but he then kills a bunch of them. So he reacts in violence and in anger and everything else. And then, here's what just is fascinating to me. The people of Judah, who are supposed to be Samson's people, like his crew, and they're supposed to protect each other because the Philistines are against them, and so they're oppressing them and everything. Here's what happens. The Philistines want to come and arrest Samson. And then the people of Judah respond this way in Judges 15. It says, so 3,000 men of Judah went down to get Samson at the cave in the rock of Edom. And they said to him, don't you realize the Philistines rule over us? What are you doing to us? Samson's reply is this, I only did to them what they did to me. His lack of self-control cultivated a heart of immaturity. And we see that in his response because he goes, I only do it because they were doing it to me. Does that sound familiar? I'm just doing it because everybody else is doing it. Everybody else gets a phone. Why can't I get a phone? Insert your illustration to whatever everyone else is doing at moment, or why can't I moment because they're doing it moment. And this heart of immaturity is cultivated in Samson because of his lack of self-control. And so the end result is the people that should have been defending him, the people that should have protected him, said this, you know what? We're done. The Philistines came in, they're like, yo, he's in the cave. We'll go get him for you. Well, why? Because he wore on people so much that it got to the point where they were just like, you know what, you got to learn your lesson some way or another. And so we've just got to give you up to this. Where did it come from? Immaturity. And a lack of self-control in his life. So here's a little immaturity recap so far with Samson. And see if maybe you fit in somewhere in here. He makes decisions simply based off of lust. And in this case, it was sexual, but lust can carry over to other things besides sex. But he makes a decision out of lust first. And he's like, I want it, I want to get it. He went off his primal desires there to just be like, I'm just going to do this. And so he made decisions just simply based off because he had a sexual desire and he just went in with that desire. I wonder how many of our decisions or how many of our situations that we've gotten ourselves into have just simply come from a lack of self-control. Think about it this way. I sometimes when I'm counseling couples and we just talk about sex and marriage and sometimes, I sit with couples that are having sex before marriage. And so when we talk through that, I never condemn them or judge them or anything like that. But I ask them this, do you believe that God has a larger, more complete plan for sex than you do? Do you believe that God, who invented it, would maybe know a little bit more about it and has a larger plan for it than maybe you do? And if they have any kind of faith, they'll inevitably say yes. Like they know the answer is yes. And so then the question then becomes, then why are you kind of going like kind of opposite of what God would desire for us when it comes to sex? Why would you do that? And then the answer is a lack of self-control. And so what that means is that when we kind of let that go as like, no, I just want to do what I want to do, then we begin setting up things and like kind of idols in our life or setting up scenarios that aren't healthy for us. Now, can all that be redeemed? And sure, it all can be. But Are we aware of the choices that we make? And sometimes what ends up happening is that lack of self-control in that relationship before they got married. And then when they're married, they're like, yeah, we can have sex. Now it doesn't matter. But then what happens is the self-control piece that was missing in the beginning then bleeds over into their marriage in different areas. And it just reveals itself in different ways. And so maybe you kind of resonate with that. Maybe you kind of resonate with the fact that the consequences of your decisions have just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, 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 as we see with Samson. Or maybe you resonate with his anger, that his reaction and his immaturity and in his lack of self-control, you resonate with his anger. And you know what? Can we be angry at injustice in the world? Absolutely. Are there things we can get angry about? Yeah, there are. But we're not supposed to get sinful in our anger. And what we see with Samson is, he gets violent, he gets angry, he kills people. And you might be saying, it's like, I've never killed anybody. But, people who struggle with that part in anger, like, have thought about it or wished it. And so maybe you resonate with that part from your lack of self-control. Or maybe you resonate with the part that your lack of self-control has brought good people kind of in. You're scheming or you're lying has like roped in other people, and it's caused pain in their life. Where did that come from? A lack of self-control. Well, Samson's story continues, and this woman comes on the scene named Delilah, and she is in all likelihood she was a prostitute, because we don't see in the Bible, if you don't see a man's name or a place associated with a woman's name, that means she was probably a prostitute. And so we see this woman named Delilah, and she's a schemer as well. And so she kind of tries to figure out where the strength of Samson comes from. And where do we think the strength of Samson comes from? His what? Okay, I'm going to prove you guys wrong in a second. But like there's, you're like, dang it, I shouldn't have answered that. I should have just said Jesus. But like there's, we know that she's trying to figure it out, and so she starts scheming, and the Philistines are trying to get her to figure it out too. And so eventually he gives in. And he gives in, which was breaking this promise with God and everything else. So he gives in, and then his strength is gone when his hair gets cut. But it's not about his hair getting cut. Because in the Bible it says that when his hair got cut, the Spirit of God left him. So it wasn't about his hair, it was about the Spirit of God leaving him. That's where his real power came from. So in the same way, that's why I brought up the fruit of the Spirit in the beginning. Because that's like the Spirit of God, the power of God working in us. And when we go against that or outside of that, then we're missing that kind of power that God is literally saying to us, it's available if you want it. If you want it, it's yours. And so, but when we step out and just start doing what we want and everything, and again, if I were to go around the room with a mic and just say, hey, tell me how lack of self-control has hurt your life. And everyone would have a story. We would go in and I could say, second question would be like, do you think you were following God like in step at that moment? And the answer will always be no. And then what we see is in the moment where you needed power, in the moment where you needed control, in the moment that you needed something to help you get through, we missed it because we had turned away from God in those moments. And so we see that in Samson, that the Spirit of God began to leave him. Now, here's what we then tell our kids in this story, if you kind of grew up with this story. Then we know, if you know the ending of the story, and it's this, that Samson comes and he has this prayer, and this is kind of how we typically tell it. He prays to God, and he's got the pillars, he's strapped to the pillars, and he takes the pillars down and crushes everyone around him. So we're like, yay, murder, right? Like, be like Samson. But I want you to see what he really prayed for when right before that happened, and see if maybe there's another story to Samson. Judges 16:28. When Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me again. Oh God, please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my 2 eyes. So his prayer is out of vengeance. His prayer is, man, I want my eyes back. I want to hurt them. See, what ended up happening again, his lack of self-control. He didn't care about his future self. He didn't care about his future relationships. He didn't care about anyone else's perspective. It was his lack of self. And even in his prayer, he says, it's about my eyes. Well, ultimately, a lack of self-control prevents him from seeing the bigger picture. And we see that in his prayer. We see that in his life. And so when he's like, it's about my eyes, and we see the weakness in him still. We see his inability to understand that, man, it's not about you. You've distanced yourself from God. You've ignored God. You've chosen this completely opposite way to live. That's why the power is gone. And you might say, but how did it happen? Why did he get power one more time? Well, this is what happened. This was the beginning of the rescue of Israel. Why? Because God was looking at the enemies of God in that moment and did something about it. He worked in the midst of the weakness of Samson. So in the same way, guess what? He's worked in your weakness. Whatever weakness you have now, God is still at work. Whatever weakness you'll have in the future, God will still be at work. He worked in spite of Samson. So you still might be, if you guys, for those of you that know the Bible really well, you might be saying something like this. Yeah, but Wags in Hebrews 11, he's in the Faith Hall of Fame. Yeah, he's listed in there, but not because of what he did, because of what God did. You see, in that weakness, God came through in a way to kind of set up the rescue of his people. But here's what this doesn't mean. Yes, God comes through in our weaknesses, but our goal is not to stay weak. See, we got to see, man, I should crave what God has for me and believe that there's something great for me in my relationships and for my future self. I should want that, desire that, and see and begin to explore that on a deeper level. And for some of us, it's just been, we've been ravaged by just lack of self-control, which, is honestly just a different way to just talk about the sin in our life. But that lack of self-control, what's happened and what's stirring up, and it's just continuing to bring us away from who God designed us to be. So I've got 3 practical questions, and then we'll pray. And the first one's this. Where do you see yourself in the story of Samson? Where do you see yourself in the story of Samson? The second one is this. What path are your decisions putting you on? What path are your decisions putting you on? Because again, if you really want to, you can answer those pretty easily, can't you? If you really want to see, man, where am I headed in my relationships? It's pretty easy to see by the decisions that we make. And then the third one is this. The third one is, can you put it up there? I forgot it. There we go. Does your level of self-control tell your future self you are important? Does your level of self-control tell your future self you are important? You see, ultimately, when we see ourselves in this story with Samson, and when we see ourselves and what's kind of resonating with us, the question is, does the lack of or presence of self-control in my life really, am I telling my future self that I care? Am I telling my future relationships that I care? That only comes from a heart that's oriented towards really wanting what is best and what God's best is for our lives. So let's pray. God, we are all a work in progress. There's no doubt about that. Every single one of us is. And so as we're kind of processing this together and becoming aware of where it is in our life that we need it, I pray that we would be open and honest with ourselves, and that we would be open to just kind of how you're speaking to us right now. And so, God, it might be in the relationship that we're in. It might be in the mindset that we have. It might be in the way we parent. It might be who we are at work. It might be something physical in our health. It might be something financial, whatever it is. That we would pause for a second and start thinking about, what does it mean to have self-control there? What does it mean to desire God's best in that area? And so, God, I'm just so thankful that in my weaknesses you're at work. In my past you've been at work in spite of me, and I know we can all say that same thing. But God, my prayer is not only for just me, but for all of us, is that we would want your best for our lives. That we would desire to see you on a deeper level and believe and trust that you've got something greater for us. But we need self-control to get there. And so God, for some of us, this is the first time to saying yes to following you. For others, it's going to be just a yes to the area that you know it needs work. And so God, I'm so grateful that you do want what's best for us and what's great for us. And we've just got to see you in the midst of it. And so God, we have hearts to hear, or ears to hear, and hearts that are open to you, and that we would want to respond actively as we leave here today. In your name we pray, everybody said. Amen. Hey, if you did say yes to Jesus today, we've got people at the What's Next area on your way out. It'll be to your left and then in the lobby that want to help you take next steps. And we've got some things there to help you do so. If you want to get connected here, there are people there to talk to you about that too. You guys, thank you so much for being here today. And praying for a breakthrough for everybody. And we'll see you all next week.